The movie begins with Mason Petitz, a guy who has always been a bit lost in life. Growing up, he couldn't find a purpose, and honestly, he didn't seem too excited about looking for one. He tried law school but quickly realized that studying laws was about as exciting as watching paint dry. So he dropped out. That's when he decided to join the US Army. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. He found purpose, action, and to top it off, he married Jenny and had a daughter. Everything was going well until his team was sent to the fictional country of Polonia to overthrow the dictator President Juan Venegas. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, it went south fast. A missile hit their helicopter, and Mason was the only survivor, left with eternal back pain and a farewell letter from the army. With no other choice, he went back to his life as a lawyer, but he quickly realized that swapping rifles for paperwork was a terrible idea. His career was boring, his marriage started to crumble, and he became that guy who stares out the office window wondering where it all went wrong. Then, Sebastian, his former general and now a private security entrepreneur, came back into his life with a suspicious proposal. He wanted Mason to accompany journalist Claire Wellington to Polonia for an exclusive interview with none other than Venegas. The same Venegas who ruined his career and killed his friends. Of course, Mason refused. But then came the final push. Sebastian offered him $20,000 and rubbed in his face how much he hated being a lawyer. With a resigned sigh and a back that creaked like an old door, Mason accepted. Meanwhile, Claire was also trying to rebuild her career after a professional blunder that left her in journalism limbo. It was like a meeting of lost souls trying to reinvent themselves. Before the trip, Mason and Jenny had a fight. The reason? Their daughter had taken Mason's advice and hit someone at school. Jenny, already at her limit, said she couldn't stand seeing Mason so unhappy anymore and threatened to leave. But Mason left first, explaining that he was taking a security job. Jenny, probably too exhausted to argue, let him go, hoping this weird mission would somehow save their marriage. So, Mason set off for Polonia with Claire, who was already sick of the jokes about her past career mistakes. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Venegas himself, who, besides being a dictator, had a knack for being a charming rogue. He even kissed Claire's hand, but the honeymoon phase ended fast. They were soon attacked by mercenaries, and Mason had to prove that, despite his back pain, he was still a warrior. Amid gunfire and explosions, he took charge of the situation and, after an insane chase, got Claire and Venegas into a forest. There, he called Sebastian for extraction while Venegas called his nephew George to let him know he was still alive. George, in turn, freaked out because, guess what? He was the one who ordered his uncle's assassination. Things only got more chaotic when George and his mercenary boss, Coer, showed up, ready to finish the job. But Mason, though battered and bruised, still had fight left in him. After another round of explosions and hand-to-hand combat, Venegas, who had mostly been spouting dramatic lines, shocked everyone by saving Mason at the last second. In the end, the three of them ended up in Venegas's hometown, where, to everyone's surprise, he was treated like a hero. Claire finally got her interview. Mason kept grumbling as a bodyguard, and the audience was left wondering, why does this dictator seem so beloved by the locals? Now, a fun fact about the movie. It stars John Cena, who played a similar character in The Suicide Squad, 2021, but here, he's more of an exhausted hero than a psychopath in a helmet. And speaking of questionable decisions, if I were Mason, I definitely wouldn't take a security job involving the guy who destroyed my life. But on the other hand, at least it was more exciting than writing legal briefs at a desk. Moving on with the film, Claire brings up the earlier attack and asks why the hell those mercenaries were after them. Venegas, ever the storyteller, explains that Polonia is rich in lanthanide, a rare mineral essential for making everything from smartphones to laptops. The problem? Major Western corporations want to exploit this resource without caring about the land, the environment, or anything beyond profit. Since Venegas decided to stop these companies from sinking their claws into his homeland, he became enemy number one for a lot of powerful people. So, of course, mercenaries and militants started pouring in, trying to take him down. But for now, none of that matters because that night, Claire, Mason, and Venegas decide to forget their troubles and party with the locals. After the fun, Claire tries to seduce Mason, but he refuses. The next day, hungover and trying to make sense of everything, Mason calls Sebastian and asks why the hell he was chosen for this mission. Then comes the bombshell. Sebastian admits he sent Mason to kill Venegas as revenge for the deaths of his old squad. Venegas wasn't even responsible for the attack. And the mercenaries? Well, they were only supposed to target Venegas, but something went wrong. Typical. Shaken, Mason calls home and talks to his daughter, who tells him her mom is upset. Later, Jenny, relieved to hear his voice, begs him to come back alive. Sensing the chaos was just beginning, Mason suggests they leave the village immediately, but it's too late. Coer and his men arrive, wreaking havoc. With no time to think, Mason jumps on a horse with Venegas and takes off at full speed. Claire tries to escape too but trips and gets captured. Mason is worried, but Venegas reassures him, "Relax, as long as I'm alive, she's safe." Well, if he says so. Now safe in a nearby city, Venegas drops another revelation. He wasn't the one who shot down the American helicopter during the invasion. In fact, Polonia's forces didn't even have the technology for something like that. Meaning, an American pulled the trigger by mistake. Mason then admits he was sent to kill Venegas, but Venegas just smiles and says he already knew. The next day, Coer and his gang show up in the city, and Mason hatches a crazy plan to save Claire, offer Venegas in exchange. But when Venegas surrenders, thousands of locals appear to protect him, forming a human shield that's impossible to break. Since the mercenaries were only hired to kill him, not to massacre civilians, they hesitate. In the confusion, Venegas, Mason, and Claire escape through underground tunnels and sneak into the presidential palace. There, they find George alone and terrified. Claire, always thinking about the headlines, starts live-streaming everything. Venegas tries to convince George that he doesn't want to hurt him and that they can rule together. George gets emotional and hugs his uncle, but the happiness is short-lived. A general storms in and shoots Venegas, and in a dramatic showdown, he and George kill each other. Plot twist. Venegas survives thanks to a bulletproof suit. Devastated by his nephew's death, he finds himself surrounded by soldiers pointing guns at him. But with a speech, he convinces them that he is their president, not their enemy. The soldiers buy it, and when Coer arrives with his mercenaries, the troops turn against him to protect their leader. Meanwhile, Sebastian shows up out of nowhere with reinforcements. In the chaos, Coer finds Mason and decides it's time for revenge. He reveals that he was the one who shot down the helicopter and killed Mason's friends. Furious, Mason attacks and they engage in a brutal fight. After a brutal back and forth, Coer gets the upper hand and is about to kill Mason, but Claire shoots him in the head about 10 times, ensuring the comeback. Now fueled by adrenaline, Mason grabs a massive machine gun and goes on a rampage, taking down mercenaries while Claire keeps broadcasting everything live. The video goes viral, and the whole world watches Polonia's chaos unfold. In the end, Venegas decides to step down from dictatorship and announces public elections for the following year. Back in the US, Mason reunites with his family and tries to fix his marriage with Jenny. He also gets a surprise when he checks his bank account. Venegas wired him a whopping $5 million as a reward. Now financially set for life, Mason decides to focus on what truly matters, his family. Moral of the story? Sometimes the real prize isn't money, it's spending time with loved ones. Or maybe it's the $5 million.